This is the Slots and Sockets Podcast, episode number 65. I am one of your hosts, IRD Moose, and my partner in crime,
Turbo Penguin.
Hey, Turbo. Yep, it's we got a little bit of an early show today because life apparently decided to happen tomorrow. But we've got a few fun things to talk about. Not a whole lot of news. It's been kind of dry, but so we decided to kind of make this a little bit of a what we hope to see out of AMD, or what we'd like to see out of AMD once we kind of get through the news. So, what's our first topic for the evening, Turbo?
Well, first, there is a Nvidia hotfix that fixes more of bad drivers from Nvidia.
Yep.
We'll have the link in the show notes. But yes, so there is another hotfix. This is another one that they're not actively advertising, even though there's lots of things that they're fixing with this. A lot of game crashes. So again, trying to make NVIDIA cards suck less, from what I understand.
I mean, that's a good thing any way you slice it. So
yeah,
I'll call that a win.
You do have that. And then the other thing is that, it's the summertime. So again, just like last week, there's not a ton of new things, but we've kind of seen some more rumors than anything else about possibly a faster, beefier version of the 9070 XT from AMD.
Mm-hmm.
And, you sit there and you look at it and you start to think, okay, so what would you want? The rumors are that they're going to take a 9070, add more power, boost up the clocks, and there's talk that they're going to have GDDR7, not GDDR6. Now, that's going to help with, and I would expect if you're going to go that far, because that would mean you'd have to tape out the die.
Yep.
Because you'd have to have a different RAM controller.
Yep.
That you would most likely increase the bus. Now, so you would, if something like that were to happen, you would probably be looking at, depending on how much, you would see a big bump in bandwidth. Now, 9070 XT wasn't really a bad on bandwidth. So I do think you'll see some higher bandwidth speeds, and I think you'll see some benefit. It's not like they're fixing like the biggest downfall these cards have.
Right.
The biggest thing that we would be looking at with this new card would be the higher base power draw.
Yep.
Because in all honesty, in the 9070 XT, the biggest holdback is really power. Even though you have 3 8-pin connectors, a lot of these cards just don't pull a lot of power. Now, I don't know if that's how AMD kind of said it, if they put some restrictions on it. I don't know where that is. But I will say, if you were to unlock and really push the silicon, though, then I think you could obviously get some really good bumps, because even with the limited overclocking you're able to get, depending on the card, some people are seeing a 10, 12, 15% bump with an overclocked 9070 XT, getting close to and pushing closer to a 5080.
Mm-hmm.
Or really kind of actually probably closer to a 4080 Super, to be honest. So if you were able to really kind of push more power, and the clock speeds that they're talking about is much higher. So they're talking somewhere between 3.4 and 3.7, 3.4 and 3.7 gigahertz. So it kind of comes back full circle, is like, what until we actually see, I think that AMD kind of looks at this and says, they're probably looking at it and thinking, okay, we could do this. I wouldn't doubt that internally that there are teams looking at some different configurations and trying some things out.
Yeah.
Probably have a couple of test cards that they've run through and made, and they're probably looking at feasibility of where they could realistically get power. Um, the one thing I would say beyond that is, um, realistically speaking, AMD is probably also trying to figure out what a 5080 Super is going to do performance wise. We know that the 5080 we have is one of the versions of the 5080 that Nvidia played with.
Mm-hmm.
We know that they were pretty far down the 5080 24 gigabyte that didn't get released, that is most likely going to be released as the 5080 Super.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I think AMD probably needs to think about where their performance is, where they need pricing to be, and if they're happy. Now, we know yields from the 9070 have been very good. Very good.
Yeah, to
In
the point
fact,
where they're actually taking certifiable 9070s and cutting them down to 9060s.
and that's, which is why we don't see a huge price difference between a 9070 XT and a 9070 is because they really weren't getting yields that only qualified as a 9070. And they're doing the same thing with the 9060. Again, they're not really having the yield problem. So, it's a good and a bad thing. The downside to it is that your cost is staying stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
The downside is that you're not getting a ton of savings because you were going to throw these things away. Um, it's a unique position because typically speaking, um, well, from what I understand, the yields are so good that they're getting yields at the beginning where they were getting, where most in the prior generations you were getting near the end of a run once
Mm-hmm.
you'd kind of had a lot of manufacturing process and learning how to put these things together. You usually have steppings where you're trying to fix things. Well, AMD is still on the original stepping. They haven't done it because they don't need to.
Yep.
And so the question comes into is it okay? Um, are we really just going to take a 9070 XT and with a BIOS and just unlock and just give it more RAM? That's very possible what they're talking about doing.
Yeah.
The downside to this is that the only difference you're going to get on these cards is GDDR7.
Well, I
So
mean, if they're taping it out to
hardware
redo,
differences, yeah,
right,
hardware differences.
right. If they're taping it out to change the memory controller, assuming they didn't build GDDR7 support into the original silicon, which is possible they may have, just thinking, okay, we don't want to go with 7 right now, so we're going to build it to do both. There are chips that have been known to do that in the past. But if they didn't do that, then they could legitimately just say, okay, well, we're doing it. Let's add 50% more shader units to it and just blow the doors off of the 5080. Because I mean, if you combine the performance of a 9070 XT and a 9060 XT and throw 24 gigs of GDDR7 at it, that's going to land in a really nice position between the 5080 and the 5090, I think. It won't necessarily be a linear increase in performance, but I think it will be enough that AMD could go after the higher end of the market legitimately. Because if you can get up there with comparable or even remotely close AI or RT performance to what Nvidia is getting in the 5080 and the 5090, um, and you can price it below the 5080, you're going to take the market. And this is AMD's time, where I don't think in the long run it would hurt them to not do it, but in the short run, I think it would be exceedingly beneficial, especially coming next generation, where they're showing that, hey, this current generation is solid. We're we're adding more products. We changed our mind. We are going to go after the high end, and I think they have an opportunity to do now with Radeon what they did with Zen and Intel, and just catch Nvidia with their pants down.
I don't know. I'm going to be interested to see. Um, the other half is I don't necessarily. I'm not super confident that AMD's going to really pull the trigger and say we're going to jump on it and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any evidence to say they will. Basically what I'm saying here is what I hope they might do. Because I would love to see it, but not being deep into the business, I don't know if that even makes business sense right now. Considering their initial statements, even to shareholders, that hey, we're not going to go after the high end. We're going to put our high end resources on UDNA, and I maybe it's something they can do. Maybe what we see is just a refresh on the 9070 that gives it GDDR7 and maybe a little bit more performance and 24 gigs to go after the 5080 Super. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would love to see AMD just be like, all right, we're in good position to strike and strike hard. And, if they can get win after win after win, they might be able to shrink the multi-generational need to have solid wins down to maybe one or two generations where they actually get some significant market share. And we start seeing them climb up the Steam charts and, leverage what they already have in the console space to fund that. Because I mean that's what AMD's been doing all these years, is they've been using one product line to fund the other while they're trying to, basically rebuild it from the ground up. And now they have two solid product lines with Zen and RDNA 4, that I don't know. I think it could be pretty cool.
I think it'd be cool. I think the loaded question from a business perspective is, you know, is AMD going to look at the cost and put the risk there?
Right.
Because, I mean, I mean this 100%. I do not think the 7900 XTX and the 7900 XT sold very well. I
No.
thought it was, in all honesty, it just didn't sell well. The 6000 series did sell much better. The 6800 XT and the 69 and the 6950, the RDNA 2, really did sell much better. But the question is, do you just say, you know what, we're still not going after it? We're making tons of money on the 9070 XT. We're not, if you're not confident that you can be super aggressive. But I still think the other half of this is if you release a 90X, the 9070 XTX or a 9080 XT, whatever you call it, and let's say you try to sell it, you sell it for 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're selling 9070 XTs for 1,000.
Right. So those would
So
probably be 15.
so the question is,
So,
like, does that move up to 15, or do people start saying, okay, well, maybe I can't be selling the 9070 for 919?
right.
I mean, because if I look at Micro Center, the scary piece of all of this is that surprisingly, a lot of the 9070s that you can go buy
Hmm.
are nowhere near MSRP.
Right. Well, and that
Um,
may be something that AMD wants to take advantage of too, and also potentially their board partners. But again, like you said, it may not make business sense for them to do it, to throw sink all that cost into developing the 9080 when they've already got plans in roughly 18 a year to 18 months from now to come out with UDNA
I mean,
and
I'm
the
looking at
10,000 series.
my local micro center. The cheapest as 9070 is 829. The most expensive is 939.
So if they so I think where AMD would probably win if they did a 9080 is they set the MSRP at 899. Just be like, we're undercutting Nvidia by $100 and we're giving you way more performance. And then let the market do what the market does, because a lot of those prices right now are not driven necessarily by the add-in manufacturers, but rather by the fact that for, 4 or 5 months now, we've had no yield or limited yield and limited availability, even though AMD has had significantly more availability than
I
Nvidia.
just I just worry that what's going to happen is that they're just going to that board partners are going to make like even them like the gigabyte model that was one of the few that was 599. um it was there on launch day, and then it was 729, and even now you don't really see it at all.
Mhm.
It just doesn't exist. So the question comes in is like you'd have to be at a price point, but you still have to be price competitive. But if your competitors of the 5080 are selling at $1,500 with an MSRP of 999, like you're like, okay, so we can sell it for less than that. You even if you sold it at $1,000, you say, obviously they don't have control over the pricing. There's no MSRP pricing on these. I just worry that we're not going to see MSRP pricing at all. But I don't know. I mean, I the
Yeah,
board
I don't
partners
either.
are struggling from what I'm hearing.
Hmm.
Board partners are struggling because they're not selling cards. Even at the higher pricing, they're not moving a lot of cards. And I'll say this, it seems like that market, we talked about this before, has really kind of flipped where cards are available at a higher price and still not moving.
Yeah,
So,
it's the market here is doing what Europe did,
yeah,
but Europe did it
exactly.
much earlier, where they're just like, we ain't touching that. And about the only people that bought the 50 series and in Europe were people like Derbauer and people that actually needed to review it. So I mean I could see it being a double-edged sword, and if AMD was hardcore about saying, okay, we're launching this at 899, we need you guys on the board vendor side to keep this reasonably close to 899. I mean, if you do something really cool that's got like extra features that makes your card stand out, sure, sell it for a grand. But tack another $100 on it. But don't do what you did on the Nvidia side, because you're not going to move cards.
Well,
And AMD does have that power to do some of that, to put that sort of leverage on, because it'd just be like, well, you guys go crazy on the price. We're just not going to give you chips. We'll give it to Pallet or to XFX or whomever. And sorry, Sapphire, your $1,500 9080 isn't moving. So we're going to give our chips to people who are moving cards.
I mean, I like the look, the rumors are just that, rumors.
Yeah.
I like the notion of it. I would just say I don't know necessarily if we'll see this will see the light of day as a retail product. Um, I think this, in my opinion, I believe this is probably more enthusiasts hoping that something is there.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if I would probably say 40% chance this sees light of day.
Mm. I'd
I
probably lean more toward it being 50-50, but it could go either way. We could get a 9070 that's just a GDDR7 refresh, and otherwise it's exactly the same.
but see,
Or
the same thing is that AMD could, if a 5080 Super comes out, they could just turn back around and say, okay, our cards are now, $50 cheaper. Even
Mhm.
if they had the 5080 Super at 1100 or $1,000 and they were actually at MSRP,
Yeah.
you sit there and say, fine, we're not really competing in that space, but we'll give you 85 to 90% of the performance for 599 or 499 because we're going to give everyone some rebates.
Yep.
It's a really interesting position for AMD to be in. The question is are they going to spend the money and the R&D into doing that, or do you sit there and say, you know what, we've done what we're going to do and we're happy with doing what we're doing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Well,
don't know the answer to this. It's an interesting conundrum. um the part of me thinks that the 5080 Super is ready to go if
mhm.
they need it, but I also don't believe that if they don't need it, they won't use it.
Yep. Yeah. No,
And I
I think you're
think
right.
I think internally, AMD is looking at a couple of different versions of this higher clocked chip. Um, I and I think they're probably looking at this saying, okay, where can we realistically place performance of this? What would we price it at? What's our cost? And trying to think, okay, will we get sales
Yeah.
without screwing over the cards that we have available now?
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I'm not in tune with how quickly these cards are selling now that we have general availability.
Mhm.
But like I look at 9070s, 531. I mean, if there's my local micro center probably has 25 or 30.
Well,
Um,
if Jay's Two Cents event recently, the SoCal Tech Fair, is any indication, um, gamers are excited to get their hands on Nvidia hardware or on AMD hardware rather. One of the giveaways was for a 9070 XT, people were like, "Yeah, give it to us." And then he's like, "Okay, and now we've got a 5070 from Nvidia," and people are like,
well,
"Eh, big deal."
okay, well
I mean,
that's
people are,
that's the anemic version of the 5000 series. I mean, the
yeah,
5070 and 5060 are meh because that's what
but
people are looking at and seeing. And I mean, that's stupid.
right, right, but it's
I mean,
supposed to be their direct competitor for the 9070 XT, and like people were
no, I
all
don't
excited
think
about the
so.
9070 XT. So, I
That
mean,
was just AMD
I,
doing dumb things. I
here
mean,
here's
and
a
Nvidia.
oh, I agree. I mean, Nvidia has been just shooting. Nvidia has been doing to themselves what Intel did to themselves last year with 14th gen and 13th
Yeah.
gen.
Uh,
But I think I kind of came up with a crazy off the top of my very bald head hypothesis here. So please excuse the shine. Um, what if AMD is coming out with a 9070 XTX or 9070 Ultimate that is legitimately a 9070, but it's got DDR7, and waiting in the wings until Nvidia launches their 5080 Super, they have actually a bigger chip because they've already done the design for the XTX, and they could
there's a
throw it
lot
out
of
there.
what ifs. There's
There
a
there
ton
are
of what ifs out
what
there.
if is carrying a lot of water here. I'm
It's a
like,
lot of what ifs. Look,
I'd love to see something like that where
I
AMD's
think
like,
everyone wants to see it. I think the loaded question is does anyone have the
yeah,
cojones to actually do it? I think, look, I think there's a fairly good chance Nvidia will do a 5080 Super. I don't think that a lot of people are going to sit back and be like, yeah, that's not going to happen. No, that is going
yeah,
to happen.
yeah,
Okay. The question is what is AMD going to respond? I think they're looking at maybe some responses. The question is what does it look like?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, and that I think is kind of the big question, which we won't be able to answer until things actually start hitting shelves and hitting official announcements.
Yep.
So, you know, it's one of
Time
those
will
things
tell.
that time will tell. Exactly. Well, and the other question is Jensen's cojones ray traced?
Hell, that bombshell, I think we need to end it.
All right,
Talking
yeah.
about Jensen's cojones is not
yeah, on that bombshell, and I apologize for that terrible joke. Thank you all for watching. We appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time tonight. And yeah, do remember to jump down there and comment about Jensen's cojones in the doobly-doo down below, and give us a like and a subscribe if you thought that bad joke was funny. Or especially if you don't think it was funny, give us a like and subscribe. And until next time, have fun storming the castle.
Night, everybody.
Good night.